with our final session on higher education, instruction, and learning from a Texas perspective, although the discussion might go beyond that. But let me give just some abridged bios of our distinguished panelists, and you can read their complete bio in the program. Dr. Stephen Mintz is Executive Director for the Institute for Transformational Learning for the University of Texas System and a pioneer in the application of new technologies to history teaching and research, as well as a widely recognized authority on childhood and adolescence. Dr. Mark Milliron is the Chief Learning Officer and co-founder of the student success and analytics innovator Civitas Learning. His most recent role was serving as the founding chancellor of WGU Texas. In 1999, the University of Texas at Austin's College of Education named Dr. Milliron a distinguished graduate for his service to the education field. Kaylee Charlson Jennings has taught at Collin College since 1989 and is the Carnegie Foundation for the Advancement of Teaching 2013 Texas Professor of the Year. In addition to teaching, Professor Charlson Jennings directs a nonprofit that trains service dogs for the disabled and serves as a pilot and canine handler for a national search and rescue team. Dr. Christina Grimsley is a recent graduate of Texas Woman's University, where she completed her PhD in rhetoric. Her dissertation investigated the ways in which an increasingly popular use of a specific technology, video podcasts, impacts students in a flipped entry-level writing classroom. And our moderator today is Dr. Marshall Schott, currently serving as the Associate Vice Chancellor for Academic Affairs at Lone Star College System. In his over 20 years in higher education administration, Dr. Schott has served on numerous boards at the local, state, and national level and has been recognized for developing innovative programs to serve students. Dr. Schott?
Thank you, Judy. Just wanted to mention briefly that in the bio, I did start in higher ed when I was 18. So I want to thank the coordinating board for setting this up. It's a great opportunity to network and to discuss issues that are of importance to the state. Also want to thank Houston Endowment for their continued support for initiatives such as this to promote teaching and learning innovation and then ultimately student success. The most challenging role that I'm going to have today is to moderate a very distinguished panel and making sure that they limit their remarks so that we do get out of here on schedule. It's certainly an honor to be joined by all of them. We've had a good program today, and a lot of interesting and thought-provoking ideas have been raised. I want to go back to something that Sally Johnstone said earlier related to the financial health of the higher education and higher education ecosystem nationally and certainly in Texas as well. She commented on the fact that CFOs have a pretty gloomy picture and forecast for higher education moving forward. Jim mentioned that it's a challenge, but we needn't think of it as apocalyptic. And I think that that's a good way to frame the conversation. It was mentioned that we don't want to let a crisis go to waste, and I think that's sort of the point that we're at in many respects as it relates to higher education reform, especially as it pertains to innovation and the intelligent use of technology to improve instruction. And that really ultimately is the driver, is how do we use the technology resources and assets that have been developed to do what we historically have done in a much better way, more efficiently, in a way that promotes student success. We need to do these things even if we weren't facing dire financial considerations at many of our institutions, because it does offer an opportunity to provide greater access and ultimately more success for our students and our communities. President Bustamante at Rio Salado had mentioned to us how important these challenges are in Texas. In many ways, these issues are heightened and magnified by the incredible demographic changes that we're seeing in our state. He'd mentioned that 65% of the jobs that are projected to be available in 2025 are going to require some kind of post-secondary credential. And obviously, if we continue on the path that we are on, we're going to have a skills deficit of about 5 million people by 2025. I'll also mention a McKinsey study that was done just last year. There's 750,000 mid-skilled jobs available in the United States right now. The skills gap is truly one of the more challenging dynamics that we face when we look at continued economic development. And then finally, Dr. Ming had mentioned really in a larger presentation around the importance of assessment, the importance of the usage of data. She raised a question and an issue that I think that we always need to keep in mind when we think about these issues, and it has to do with equity of opportunity. What we are seeing is a growing divide of opportunity between those who are affluent and privileged, upper middle class, and those who are poor and disadvantaged and increasingly minority. This is a particularly acute problem in Texas, where we know that the future workforce of the state of Texas will be predominantly Hispanic. Those kids are growing up today primarily in poor Latino households, and we have got to find a way to reach them. And hopefully the panelists today, I'm sure they will offer some best practices, some solutions, and some ideas that can be implemented so that we can address this growing gap in terms of student access and success. We are going to go down the line, and we're going to let each of the panelists provide some comments for about 3 to 5 minutes. I will have my clock at the ready. Some ideas that they want to share with you that they think are of critical importance to this larger conversation. Once each panelist has an opportunity to make some comments, I'll ask a few questions, but ultimately this needs to be engagement with you, and so think about questions that are of importance that you'd like to ask the panelists. We want this to be a dynamic session, and I'm looking for Van Davis, who's been playing Phil Donahue today. We'll be going around the room with a microphone.
I should preface this by saying that I teach mass communication. I'm the chair of essentially the mass comm department at Collin College. I developed the program. And so as a faculty member that's been teaching for 30 years, I am one of those, I'm part of that population. You know, what do we say, that some faculty were born with technology, some achieved technology, and some had technology thrust upon them. And I was actually one who achieved it, and you know, by grace of my discipline, I had to. In radio, television, film, you can't ignore it, it's impossible. But as technology moved to the forefront of our classrooms and our pedagogy, something has always been clear to me, and that is that technology, like any tool, is driven by human understanding and human strategy and human compassion and human ability. And it's necessary anytime we use technology. Anytime I approach any class that I offer, and I teach 7 different courses in any given semester, am I using this ethically? Because one thing we do know teaching through technology, I've taught online now for 14 years, is it is also possible to drown students in technology-driven content. And while we know technology is extremely popular, and most students have a Facebook page and are constantly texting, their ability to attend to multiple messages is difficult, and it is just as easy for them to get lost in a stream of text and images as it is for them to get lost in a lecture that's 3.5 hours long. Are we using it effectively for the discipline and the course itself that we're teaching? The way I use tech and media literacy is completely different from the way I use it in radio, TV, news. And I specifically go in thinking, what's the best I can do with both the classroom technology and that the students have access to at home or in their hands that is going to most bring this course alive to them? And so, and it's not a one-size-fits-all even in my discipline. And finally, I think the beauty of what's possible for us is that we are in an era where we can be intensely creative. And as a 30-year teacher who certainly sometimes am in the middle of conversations from people who are just exhausted and longing and really missing the freshness that they had when they were first teaching, is that if you've got a properly supported faculty department where people assist and directly can help you support your teaching methods. The possibilities are endless. I just collaborated with someone who was teaching about the Titanic and the Lusitania. And we developed a way, while he was using historical images and talking about the process and the different natures of both those disasters, we created a way where the telegraph messages and the ship-to-shore messages that were going away from those ships could be tweeted on screen in a split screen even as those images were rolling. And the students were acting as the radio operators. So as the class was listening to the lecture and watching the images, they were literally able to see in real time what was coming up, at the end of Morse messages. And I think it was, just a completely transforming experience for both of those disasters. And they were in the middle of it. They were engaged in it, and they understood it much better. That's what I mean when I say it's an opportunity to be creative. And I think I also teach flying, and one of the things that we have to be mindful of when we fly is don't let the airplane fly you. Fly the airplane. And the same is true with technology. But the airplanes we have, and with a little diligence and attention and creativity and practice, the amazing, amazing flights we can have.
Amen.
Steve?
I, like most of you, am first and foremost a teacher, and I've taught an awful lot of students along the way, 40,000 in face-to-face classes, not including the various online and televised classes I taught for Marshall at various points. I had 2% of all of the citizens of Houston in my face-to-face classes at various points in time. And of those students, about 30% got a D, F, or W. I thought I was teaching as well as those large classes could be taught. And anyway, the students had taken U.S. history in 5th grade, 8th grade, and 11th grade, so my class should have been the easiest class in college. And yet 30% of the students did not succeed. And this brought home a crucial message to me. If one student doesn't get it, it's the student's fault. But when 30% of the students don't get it, it's my fault. And something needs to be done about that. We in Texas are doing way better than the District of Columbia. In DC, 2% of the students who enter college graduate in 4 years, and 7% graduate in 6 years. We're doing way better than that. 17% in 4 years and 38% in 6 years. Come on, that is not nearly good enough. I was very fortunate to be put into a position where I can do something about this, I hope. And here is what I'm staking my career on. I am convinced that to drive the needle exponentially on student success, it is not enough to improve the teaching in individual classes. That instead we have to think more programmatically and systematically, and for a subsection of our student population, I am convinced that the answer lies in the following: in competency-based, personalized, adaptive, industry-aligned degree programs with powerful learning analytics to guide faculty and to guide our interventions, and a heavy emphasis on activity-driven, challenge-driven, problem-solving teaching. For many of my students, they need a streamlined pathway to a degree with a clear value proposition at the end. Is that the education you get in a small liberal arts college like the one I attended? No. Is it like the exploration that many people get at Stanford or Columbia where I taught? No. Is it for a segment of our students who must juggle extraordinarily complicated lives, who are caregivers and full-time workers with immense personal responsibilities? Is this a pathway to a degree? I think it is. And, in a couple years, we'll be able to see the results and see if this kind of pathway can work with the fastest growing segment of our student population. We are combining our expertise at our medical schools and our professional schools to backward design these pathways. So for example, one of our pathways we call middle school to medical school, but it's really to all the health professions. And we'll have similar programs in engineering and in nursing. And we'll see if we can fundamentally drive the needle on student success. All of you, I am sure, are exhausted by initiative fatigue, by all the efforts we make to drive student success. And they have driven success, but they haven't driven it as far as we need to. 38% is not acceptable. It's really obscene. And we know, I think, what it takes to drive the needle, so let's do it.
Thank you, Steve. Christina.
Having recently graduated from Texas Women's University in December, I wanted to highlight some of the best practices that I experienced there as a student in their PhD program. I was telling Steve before we got started that when I started the program in 2008, all of the classes I took were face-to-face classes. And then my last 2 years, every class was online. So it was really fascinating to watch how much the program changed in the 2 years I was there and how the teachers were adapting to the changing technology and being willing to teach online courses. And it wasn't just one professor, there were several different professors that I was able to take those classes through. And most of them were quite successful, because that was a question Steve asked me as well. Well, what was that experience like? Did you feel plugged in? Did you feel isolated? And the teachers made sure to spend a lot of time in the preparation for those classes. So we were each assigned groups so that we felt like we were connected with each other. The teacher commented in all the discussion threads. There was lots of, I took a class, this was also a great practice. We talked a little bit about this today, that there's a program called the Federation, which is 3 universities in Texas have come together and said that students can take classes through each of the programs and get credit for that. So University of North Texas, Texas Women's University, and Texas A&M and Commerce offer their catalog to each other. So I was able to take a couple of courses through the Texas A&M Commerce program. And even through that, I wondered how isolating that would feel, because I hadn't met any of those students. But the professor created that class in such a way that we each engaged with each other through the discussion boards. We had projects together. She also did something which fascinated my later work on the flipped classroom. She had a lot of audio podcasts. So not only did we read, but we had several audio podcasts of her giving us key information. So we felt very connected to her as well, even though I never met her until a couple of years later at a conference. She did video podcasts as well. And so that later, I felt that that was so critical. I was able to re-listen to those podcasts as I was working on different projects and preparing for tests, that I began to wonder, how could I do that in my own classrooms, which is where I started to read more about the flipped classroom, which has become incredibly popular in public education, less popular in higher education, but it's starting to grow more there as well. And the key there is not to use technology just to use technology, which is a theme that we keep hearing over and over, but instead, what is my purpose in flipping this lesson? And so it was a goal for me. It was solving a problem. In English, which is where I got my degree and I teach English, we run into the same challenges that you all have talked about with technology, learning technology, keeping up with technology. And one of our biggest fears and why we haven't embraced technology as much for our students is how much time do I spend in my class talking about the technology versus these critical thinking applications, teaching them about rhetoric and kind of these more higher order skills as opposed to functional literacy skills, functional computer literacy skills. And so I was able to use the flipped classroom as a way to demonstrate how to use the technology that I was asking my students to use. So they watched those videos at home. And then when they came to class, we didn't talk at all about how to use Animoto or how to use Extra Normal or this web-based application. Instead, it was how do you create a video that effectively reaches its audience? What kind of gestures do the characters make? What kinds of language do you use? What's the right music that you would use and the sounds? So we were able to engage very critically in that conversation as opposed to, well, where do I find the menu options and where do I create, how to make this character move and the sound? And so I say all that to say that as we continue tinkering with these technologies, that we continue to think of constructive ways to use them. And I've been very impressed in my own PhD program that Texas Women's University was able to have professors who are willing to step out and try new things, as well as engage with the students as well.
Thank you.
Mark?
So just to frame some of the comments we'll make later, I think it's important to kind of share what we believe. I think we've all talked about it. And I think as we approach the challenges we're talking about in terms of the road ahead, I just want to share kind of three big things that I deeply believe. One is I believe we as a country and as a state can do big, innovative, powerful things in the world of education. Two, I think we can do it in really thoughtful ways. And then third, I really believe we can do it with a courage that involves and is in many ways deeply inclusive of the people who are part of this process. And just to quickly unpack that, one, I just left the SHIO meeting, the State Higher Education Executive Officers meeting in Boise, Idaho. And one of the things they were doing is kind of a reflection on the history of that association. And one of the things they pointed out, Paul Lingenfelter did this great kind of historical document. If you want to pick it up, I think they actually have it digitally on their site, which is worth taking a look at. But they pointed out, he was talking about the transition of our country since the Truman Commission. And in 1947, when the Truman Commission came out with these really big, hairy goals for education in the United States, one of the things they said is coming out of that commission was we needed to double the participation in higher education in the United States. And we needed to create community colleges, which at that point didn't exist, or technical colleges and junior colleges. At that point, we had a grand total of about 2 million people in higher education. And if you think about where we've come since then, where we've literally, through a combination of combinations of institutions and the invention of institutions, launched more than 1,200 community colleges, and we now have more than 23 million people involved in higher education, you realize we can do big, really important things. And that was really about the access agenda. In the last 5 to 7 years has really been about this coming together of the access and success agenda, which is saying not only do they need to get access to education, we need more people to succeed on those pathways. And I think that is our big thing, right? And I think people are trying to figure out how we take that on in a really thoughtful way. And what's encouraging is I'm seeing the rise of what I would call student success scientists, people who are willing to use data in really powerful ways to pinpoint the challenges, to try and test solutions, and then to take those data and bring them even more closely to the front lines. The challenge is we still have some institutions that haven't moved in that direction. You kind of, if you want to, kind of be blunt about it, you have 4 kinds of institutions that are out there, or folks that are approaching this. You have folks who are, in some ways, in status quo and losing ground. They don't really want to face the data, and they don't really want to change what they're doing. You know anybody like that? In fact, I wrote a piece a few years back called "Are You Dying to Use Data?" which talked about people's reaction of data along Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's stages of death and dying. People are denial and anger and bargaining and depression and acceptance, right? Because they don't want to. I mean, if you look at, for example, the reaction to the Houston Endowment study that looked at that 8th grade cohort going all the way through, there was amazing, just almost outright denial of what the data was going to look like. And then you have folks who are almost in analysis paralysis. They have done a whole host of data work, but it has been so far removed from the front lines, and or it has been our chief data scientist at Civitas is from the healthcare world, and one of his first reactions when he started looking at how we did data in education, he said, "My Lord, you are swimming in autopsy data." Because what we look at is data that is well after the students are gone, right? And so it's deeply removed. Or you have people who don't really have a lot of data, but boy, they're trying. They're in best practicism, and they're really trying a whole lot of different initiatives and activities. But increasingly, we're seeing big national and state-based movements. Texas Completes is one of them, Achieving the Dream, Red Balloon, host of others, that are saying, let's get really thoughtful about this and in some ways become student success scientists. Use the data to pinpoint the challenges, try and test solutions, and then that final step, which is to have the courage to move the data to the front lines as much as possible. Because what we're seeing is if you can get the data in the hands of faculty, get the data in the hands of advisors, and even in the hands of students, it's amazing. They will make good choices. If you can help them understand what the directions mean and what the implications are. But it's amazing to me how we chide students for not having the ability to self-regulate, but we don't give them the data to self-regulate. So the idea of being able to tell them when they're on course or when they're off course and figuring out how we can make that shift. And here's the biggest bang for the buck, and then we can get on to our questions, which is to make this shift of doing this kind of big thing in a thoughtful way with a lot of courage. It's going to mean, especially as we think about learning analytics and data and use of data, is we're going to have to fundamentally make a shift from a predominant conversation about accountability analytics and move to what I would call action analytics. Accountability analytics are really about data for administrators and trustees and legislators. We are going to have to move our focus. Doesn't mean we don't do accountability analytics. I understand why people want that, and I understand the whole notion of being fiscally responsible and being responsive to public policy folks. But we have to have as much energy, at least, into the action analytics side and get a commitment to getting the data in the hands of teachers and in the hands of students and in the hands of advisors. And I think if we can allow them to be student success scientists, right? Let them see the data. Just a simple thing. Every coach in this country in Division I or Division II who's going to work with a set of athletes for that next year has a complete dossier on the athletes they're going to be working with, including their academic backgrounds along with their athletic backgrounds, and they have a learning plan for what they're going to be doing with them. How many faculty members have anything close to that when they walk into the first day of their class? Unless they're in a PhD program and they have graduate students that they've recruited, that's not what they have. So it's just the simple things we've got to start thinking about, how we bring those data to the front lines and figure out how we can help involve as many people as possible in being student success scientists to try to figure out how we can move the needle and actually figure out which of these investments and these innovations we want to double down on, which are the ones that we can bring to scale, which are the ones that are going to make the biggest difference.
Great, thank you. A couple of questions, and then we'll turn it over to the audience. Was struck by Kaylee's comment about the technology allows for intense creativity. And there's been some conversation today, and certainly an ongoing conversation about open educational resources. Would like the panelists to comment in terms of the potential impact of OER on delivery of higher education. Obviously, there's issues related to cost and affordability that come into play. And then secondly, the second part of the question is, what are the barriers or challenges to see strategic implementation of OER at an institutional level? Anybody?
We have a lone eagle approach to teaching, which many of us have benefited from enormously, and we're now beginning to shift to a different model where we're going to collaboratively create courses and educational resources. And one of the great challenges is going to be to convince faculty to make use of instructional content that they didn't develop single-handedly. We are creating simulations and animations that are extraordinarily expensive. We're creating interactive laboratories and virtual reality environments, again, that cost an arm and a leg, and that I think can greatly enhance the educational experience. But we have a huge impediment, and that is the willingness of faculty to share their intellectual property with appropriate compensation and to use these materials that were developed by others. We have no problem using textbooks, right? We don't have to write all of our own books. Well, we're moving to the next stage where open educational resources, I think, will be absolutely essential if we're going to have the kind of student learning outcomes that we want.
Thank you.
I think OER has huge potential. I'm on the board of the Institute for the Study of Knowledge Management and Education, which is the organization that actually helped found OERcommons.org. And it's been, what's pretty clear is that great educators have always understood the CASE method. CASE stands for copy and steal everything, right? Somebody else does it well, pull it together. So it's a culture that should be open to this. And what's pretty clear, what's happening right now is the publishing industry educational publishing is finally going through what the record industry and what the movie industry and others have gone through in terms of disruption of its delivery model. And now we're seeing, because of the digital distribution strategies from publishers and now OER content creators, is the ability now to curate in a more dynamic way. And I think that's the challenge right now. It's a curation challenge. I think we have got to get structures in place that allow our discipline leaders and our faculty to get curation networks together where they literally begin to work together to figure out the build, buy, share strategy. What content are you going to build because you're that good and you have that kind of expertise? What are you going to buy from publishers and other places that have expertise? And what are the things you're going to share in the open content side? The biggest problem we have with the open content world is for a lot of faculty, it feels like the junk drawer, right? They don't know what's good and what's going to be high quality. But I think if we can get curation networks together that can actually come together and say, this is really good stuff, and it's been developed by these different people here, and because really good faculty have always done that. The playlist was the syllabus, right? But now we actually have more flexible tools to put this stuff together, and I think that's going to be the challenge with open content, is figuring out how we get dynamic curation networks together that allow us to sift through the stuff that's out there and kind of pull it together.
There's another huge opportunity if we can get the curation right. That is, we can personalize the content that students read according to their interests and needs. We've been working with a number of vendors to try to set up a system like that so that we can identify what a student's interested in and then align their readings with that.
And one other question. Earlier this morning, Jim Groom talked about the work that they're doing at University of Mary Washington, and it was really powerful in the sense that really the entire institution is driven by student success. It's not just the faculty and the students, it's the faculty, it's the advisors, it's the staff. They all have access to web-based tools that allow them to create a very powerful learning community at an institutional level. This is a question that maybe nobody wants to step into, but what do you see as the largest administrative barriers to pushing for innovation and change, like CBE, for example? And I guess where I'm going with this is that if you look at conventional institutions, when you look at the bursar's office, the registrar's office, if you look at the academic calendar, if you look at the life cycle of all of the processes that have to run currently, financial aid, what do you see as the largest barriers to pushing some systemic fundamental change at an institutional level from an administrative perspective so that everybody's moving in a common direction?
Our answer is you have to create it on an island. You can't create it inside an established institution. You have to create a space. We have to create the whole educational infrastructure supporting it. And we have to do it a piece at a time.
So in other words, what you're saying is that for most institutions, you create that incubator, that safe harbor where innovation can occur, where ad hoc administrative processes sometimes are going to be created and piloted out of necessity in terms of serving as a catalyst for.
The phrase is proof of concept. Right. Our hope is that if we can prove that this is successful, if it's successful at Texas A&M Commerce and it's successful elsewhere at Western Governors, then we can expand it.
Yeah. I think the real challenge is, and I'd love to get your perspectives on this, because I think part of the challenge is when you're living through this process as a student or as a faculty member, what's pretty clear when you're in the lived experience of institutions that are piloting a whole host of things and proof of concepting a bunch of things, We've actually worked with institutions where we've said, okay, let's corral all the student success innovation programs that you're actually doing and pull them together and actually try to figure out, get our arms around them. And at one institution, it was 120 different programs. And I mean, you just think about the psychic energy that takes to actually kind of keep that going in the same direction. And part of this is figuring out how do we almost develop a discipline of innovation, right? That helps us think through, let's do some light, but let's figure out what we double down on and go to the next level. What do we go to the next level? Because I think we have to solve the problems of how we're going to get things to large scale impact, right? How we're really going to make that difference for students and be willing. It does take courage to go up to the next level, because right now we've diffused the urge to innovate with 1,000 flowers blooming, right? And we've let people do lots of little things where the courage necessary to go to that next level, and I think more and more people are starting to figure out we're going to have to take those levels up. But the challenge, I think, is that yin and yang between individual faculty members feeling empowered to be able to innovate in their own space and not feeling like the institution's pedantically telling them how they're going to fix everything, versus some large-scale work that's actually going to impact the numbers. Because if you want to move the needle in certain ways, you actually have to do some systemic things. Because we've made big bets. We have lots of big bets. Every major policy we have at our institution is a big bet. The question is, can we make different bets, right? If we're going to do that. I mean, I'd love to hear that from the faculty perspective.
Goodness, well, as one faculty member among 350, I've taught at multiple institutions. I would say agreement. I think one of the most difficult things is agreement at the discipline level and at the academic department level about what that direction should be and what the best route to get there. I think sometimes our initiatives get caught up in best plan, and who's in charge of that best plan, and how is that articulated. And I think another thing that happens, not so much at my institution as much, but I know that it does happen because I hear it in my field, is fear of obsolescence, a fear of buying into something and taking this big leap and then finding out after significant equipment is bought or software is licensing is purchased or whatever that deal is, and equipping classrooms, only to find out 18 months later it didn't work, and now we've got a huge expense that can't be redone for something new. So it's that sort of prophecy of what long range has got the best chance of success and can be adapted if this big thing we try doesn't work, can be adapted to a revised plan.
You need the courage to fail.
Mm-hmm.
You need the courage to fail.
And the resources to do so.
Yeah, any questions from the audience? Oh my goodness. Charles.
Here, Charles. In terms of the ORE conversation, we have a great project here in Texas at Rice University, Project Stacks, where they're trying to compile open source textbooks for the most commonly taught undergraduate courses. They've come out with biology, statistics, physics, and I'm just astounded at the seeming faculty resistance to these books. We presented both, this was at Houston Community College, we presented both the physics and the sociology and the biology books, and the reaction was very negative and almost dismissive of these books. And I'm curious, has this been a general reaction by faculty nationwide, and what causes that? What can we do to possibly create more interest in those types of initiatives?
There's an interesting dynamic. When I was deputy director at Gates, we actually funded that project and funded a big one up in Pacific Northwest with Cable Green, and they published 85 books around core topics. And in evaluating the grants, one of the things we were most concerned about is, could they compete with the sales force and marketing of the publishers, who have a strategic interest in spreading FUD, right? Fear, uncertainty, and doubt about the quality of those resources. And let's just be blunt, it is a threat to them, right? And part of the threat is, in some ways, some of the OER folks are zealots and basically say all publishers are evil, right? And so you end up with this rhetoric of either or, and I think we have to be willing to, I think part of the challenge is we have to get over the either or and figure out that we're better with both, right? We're better with really high quality publishers doing the work and really good open content, and we're gonna blend them together, much like how we do music, right? And that's how we do music in lots of ways. But I do think it's a transformation right now because the friction, it's just lower friction for individuals and for communities of practice to develop higher quality content and distribute it more than ever before. Just like, you know, filmmakers today. You talk to a filmmaker from 20 years ago, a friend of mine just graduated from USC and is talking about just how radically different film school then 30 years ago versus today. Just there's no friction. You can go to market like that if you have something good and get distribution, and the same thing's happening in the kind of publishing industry. But don't kid yourself. You're talking about competing with multi-billion-dollar industries that have incentive to make sure the market feels the FUD, right?
Yeah, and just to build on that, the sales force for OpenStax is about the size of this panel. It's a little bit smaller than what Pearson or McGraw-Hill deploys.
And I want to make sure, I'm not saying that they're bad for what I understand what they're doing and how they're pulling that together. I just think our problem really is more about the either or conversation. I think we have to realize that, you know, really thoughtful educators are going to use both. Of course they're going to use both.
Any other questions? Yes.
My name is Kyuman Wang from University of Texas Health Science Center, San Antonio Dental School. I feel a little bit uncomfortable talking here because I'm not an educational scientist or somebody who majored in education. But as I listen to a lot of these great new ideas, which I find fascinating and great, as a parent, I come back and one of the things that I think about is, for example, things like the flipped classroom. There definitely is a lot more time commitment on the student's part. And I think that as far as students who don't want to study, as far as students who are struggling, I think it may be very helpful. But I also want to echo the comment that came out earlier today, where a lot of us are products of the old way of teaching, and we've been very successful that way. Yeah. And so just to be mindful that, you know, yes, there are two different ways of learning, and we don't want to lump some of the students who might actually do very well without the extra work and give them that burden as well. That's just one comment. Another comment I have is about the coaching. I coach my son in basketball, not his team, him. And so in that sense, yes, I have all the analytics. I know exactly how many points he scores. We wake up at 5 o'clock in the morning to go practice, and I count, but that's because there's only one of him. When we have 100 students in our class, each class, yeah, that becomes very difficult. And so it's just a little bit challenging to, I'd love to do that, but boy, how do we do that?
Yeah. And I guess, real quickly on that, I think we have got to be willing to innovate with tools that make that easier for faculty. Because right now, all the tools for analytics are about getting dashboards and reports to administrators. Whereas if we could develop lighter apps that went right to advisors and right to students, and for example, we have an app right now that's basically kind of a faculty heat map for risk outlook and for engagement that's updated every 4 to 6 hours. You've got tons of data on your campus from your SIS and from your LMS and from other systems. If you pull that together in the right way and you get a live updated kind of risk outlook and engagement index, you could literally try something on Monday morning and look by Monday night to see whether or not engagement's going up. But you do it in a way where it's not pedantic, it's not telling you what to do, it's not saying do X, Y, and Z, it's actually just informing you. It's giving you almost, in fact, the faculty here are using it, call it the thermostat, right? Are things heating up in my class, or are they getting colder? Those are the kind of light, clean, simple apps that I think would be useful, and that's part of our innovation. I think we have to do some work to innovate on, we talk a lot about building the right infrastructure to get the right data to the right people in the right way. Right now, I think our weakest point is we have some problems in the first 3, but our biggest problem is getting creative about the right way. How do you get data in the hands of people so they could actually make different kinds of choices and structure them, and it's simple and it's easy and clean? Amazon doesn't send you a spreadsheet, right? Amazon doesn't send you a dashboard. It says, people like you who are doing what you're doing right now, here's some other things they did as well, right? And that's all about structuring choice architecture. We've got to figure out what does that mean for us, right? Just real quickly, because I'm pretty passionate about this. I think if we bring data to people in the wrong way, we could actually do some real damage. I mean, can you imagine going to an at-risk student and saying, flashing red light, sorry, our risk model says you're not going to be successful, right? What do you think is going to happen to that student, right? But we can get creative and say, for example, if you're from a low-income background, from a poor high school, and you're about to walk into a community college and you want to go on a STEM pathway, do you just give up on that student? Or do you say, okay, you want to go on a STEM pathway? Guess what? Our analytics say the next milestone you have to master is this course. If you get an A or a B in this course, you increase your likelihood of getting a STEM degree by this amount. Boom, let's go do that. It does that. Here's your next milestone, right? And they just kind of keep leveling them up. That's where we can innovate on how we get those data in the right way in the hands of people and kind of inspire that kind of motivation. To me, I mean, anybody who tells you they have it figured out right now, you need to run immediately. I think this is the challenge of our time, is to figure out how we get more information in the hands of the front lines. I just think that faculty and advisors and students are starved for really good data. They would make better decisions. I've done student focus groups where they've told me, listen, you can't help me to self-regulate and not give me feedback for 8 weeks, right? It doesn't work. We've got to figure out better ways.
Christina, you got any comments on the hybrid classroom?
Sure, and it's all in the implementation of the flipped classroom as to how much homework the students will have outside of the classroom. If you're recording a full lecture, an hour lecture, and asking your students to watch that at home, that's not effective. It's looking at the content, what specifically do I want to say? A lot of teachers have reported that their lectures end up being more concise because they have to sit down and think about it, and the tangents that we can go on when we're speaking, those all are eliminated, and so you end up with a 15-minute video as opposed to a 45-minute lecture. And so even for my students, it wasn't a lot of extra homework for them. They had a video that was 15 minutes, a video that was 7 minutes, and they had an assignment associated with that so that, one, they were accountable, had to incent them to watch the videos. I found that most of them did not without some type of motivation. So that's one of our biggest challenges for anyone considering flipping the classroom. I found that less than half of my students watched the videos when I piloted this at a community college. And I credit part of that to being my first time teaching it and how well I set it up, and so I've got some solutions to that. But it's still a big challenge for us as we move forward, if thinking about using video technology to supplement the classroom. And I think that's the key there. It's a supplement. I wouldn't flip an entire classroom and flip all of the content. I flipped 4 lessons of my 16-week course.
Thank you for the clarification. If I may ask one more question. I don't know if this is within the purview of this session, but what I found is for many of the students, the problem is actually their parents. I guess in my home, the way I approach education is that you study at home and you go to school to perform. And I've spoken to a lot of my children's friends' parents who don't have much concern about sending them to college, or, their mindset could be, well, if they want to go, that's great. If not, they'll just do their own small business and they'll be fine. That kind of mindset. And so it seems that, we're trying to help the students a lot, but if there is a counterforce at home, are we even thinking about that?
I think we've got time for one more question. Yep, George.
Hi, George Granger, Houston Endowment. The one topic that hadn't been talked about a lot today, and I'd ask you all to address it, was some of the tools that you all think about that are needed for student success. It has to do with developmental studies, developmental ed. We have this ongoing onslaught of adults and young adults who are coming into higher ed, not college ready, and we know what the results are from developmental ed. And can you talk a little bit about sort of your thinking on some of the strategies that you all are promoting and how they might impact or relate to the field of developmental ed? Thanks.
I'm an advocate of personalized adaptive learning, which we heard about earlier, and that is we need to diagnose various areas where students have learning deficiencies, and then we embed remediation as well as enrichment into the curriculum, into their trajectory. my experience is that usually students aren't unprepared in general. They're unprepared, or they've forgotten or never learned a particular subject, and that I can remedy. If the problems are universal, it's a different story, but usually, in my experience, they're not. And so, very careful diagnostics combined with strategies that I know are successful in rectifying those problems tend to work.
And I'll just say something really quick. Because it was mentioned earlier, a product called Alex. It's a publisher solution. It's a vendor-driven solution. At Lone Star, we use it fairly extensively in some of our developmental ed courses. What's nice about it is it doesn't replace classroom instruction at all. I mean, we don't have any fully online remedial courses, and that's by design. But there's a pretty powerful technology component to it that requires fairly immediate assessment and feedback. And I think this gets back to what Mark is saying. You know, we don't want kids going through 8 weeks of a semester. They don't have a clue how they're doing. And so this is a solution that structures that kind of an environment so that you're getting early assessment, an early sense of how you're doing in the class, and that's pushed out digitally for the students. The other thing, and this really doesn't have anything to do with technology, and I'm sure some of you are familiar with these strategies, but you know, the idea is we want to link developmental education courses with subject matter courses or even workforce courses. What we know is that there's a significant psychological barrier for students who are going solely into developmental education. It's somewhat demoralizing for kids who think, okay, I've made a decision, I've made the commitment, I want to go to college, and then they find themselves taking nothing but developmental education. So combining that with other coursework has been very successful for us, quite frankly. I mean, we have much higher student success rates when we attach developmental education with some kind of a subject matter course.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of literature on iBest, which is one of the programs that does that. And you know, there's a lot of literature on learning communities writ large about the power of connection. And it's one of these things where you know, I think Brooks from the New York Times had this wonderful piece today about creativity is really nothing new. It's the combination of things that already exist in more elegant ways. This is a chance where we can actually take a few innovations and pull them together. So the idea of blended learning with DevEd, where you can actually use blended learning models to combine two courses, to be able to scaffold writing with your history course, where that dev writing is working with your history and you're scaffolding that process. Because, I mean, again, just be blunt about the challenge we have. You talk about the parents. We have a whole lot of students who are first-generation students who are now going through, and they're fundamentally different, right? Michigan State calls them 6-1 students. 6-1 students are students from second, third, fourth generation families that have at least 2 parents and 4 grandparents, all focused on them getting through, right? So that's different from a 0-1 student, or sometimes I do a lot of work in Appalachian inner city communities, -3, -4 students, where they have people in their life who do not want them to get educated, right? And what we need to think about is what are the thoughtful scaffolds we can provide. The structures are great, policies are good, but there are scaffolds we're going to have to provide. And I like the metaphor scaffold because scaffolds go away. You want to get them to a point of agency by the time they're done and they're really driving that piece. But this is where we can start thinking about how we combine personalized learning together with analytics against advising and support, together with the idea of kind of structuring curriculum in more innovative ways. Because I don't think there's one easy answer. I think it's going to be a combination of these things coming together, but the idea of making sure we make these pathways more logical and consistent. I wrote a piece a couple of years ago for EDUCAUSE review that was called You're the Game Changers in Next Generation Learning. It was an open letter to students that basically said, here's the deal. If you show up on purpose, have the willingness to engage at a high level, and bring tenacity to bear, then you have the right to assume that we're going to do the work to create more learning-centered, data-rich, high-value pathways for you. But you know what? All this work is not going to matter if you don't show up and do the work of figuring out why you're there and be willing to do the work when you're getting there. Because we still have problems with challenges of people just assuming that because they signed up, they should get the credential. When we launched WGU Texas, just quick tangent, when we launched WGU Texas, we actually were working with the advertising folks, and we had about 1,400 people in the state when we first launched that we were bringing in from larger WGU. And we met with the advertising marketing people, figured out how we were going to start our communication strategy. And that one of the first signs they brought us was a big billboard that said, WGU Texas, the Texas two-step. Sign up, succeed. Anybody else see the problem with that? Yeah. And we literally pushed back and said, this is crazy. They said, to be successful with Western Governors, which is a competency-based model, you've got to work your tail off. So let's tell them the truth. Let's make it the Texas two-step, work hard, succeed. And they literally looked at us, and the guy looked at me, he's like, are you on crack? You're going to tell people you want to sign up that they're going to have, like, yes, because that's reality. They're going to have to work their tail off, and then they can be successful. By the way, as we launched that campaign together with radio advertising and TV advertising, all with the same theme, WGU Texas has gone from, 1,400 students to almost 5,000 students in the course of the last 2.5 years. They really got into this. Our next billboard they brought back was, if it were easy, it wouldn't be Texan, right? And then they really got into it, and they brought us one that said, if you want easy, try Arizona. We said, no, that's not right? I do go back to that deal. I do believe in the grand bargain. I think we should make a grand bargain with students. You show up and do the work of figuring out your purpose, be willing to engage, and bring a sense of tenacity to it, because you're going to need that grit and that tenacity to succeed in here. If you do that, you have the right to assume that we're doing the work of trying to make this journey learning-centered. It's about learning. It's not necessarily about our old school policies and practices. It's what is going to improve learning. Data-rich, so you know when you're on and off course, and it's high value. It's connected to the world of work, if that's where you want to go, or the world of life and citizenship, if that's what you really need. I think we should make that bargain. It's worth it.
Right. Good. Thank you.
I think we're out of time, but please join me in thanking our panelists for a great discussion. Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you. Well, my colleague, Dr. Van Davis, who serves as Director of Higher Education Innovations for the Coordinating Board, has agreed to do a very brief wrap-up for us. Just before he does, I just want to remind you, take a moment, please, to fill out our evaluation form if you haven't had a chance to, and you can just leave it at your table. And one more thank you to George Granger and Houston Endowment for their sponsorship of this event. Thank you so much, and yes. And I'll let Dr. Davis play us out.
Well, just to try to bring a little bit of a closure to things before we all leave and go to chew on all of this. Listening to things in the back of the room and running back and forth in the room during the Q&A, there are a couple of things that really sort of jumped out at me. There seemed to be some points of agreement that all of us sort of came back to over and over again. They're our foundations. The first seems to be that what we do with students, we desperately want to make sure it's purposeful. We don't want to mess it up. We want to make it better and better and better. We also seem to all agree that relationships matter. Now, we don't necessarily know what form those are going to take, but that they matter. It's not enough to take the technology. We have to find ways to make sure that we have that personal connection, be it face-to-face or virtual, that connection has to exist. And we also seem to more or less agree that as who we educate shifts, and as all of our relationships with information and knowledge shift, that how those relationships have played out in the past may not be how they need to play out in the future, especially if we're going to reach a much larger and a very fundamentally, in some ways, different student population. But there also seem to be some points of tension that have come out of these foundational elements. And I was struck at how much this seems to mirror the points of tension that we're hearing nationally. And I want to highlight three for you real quickly for you to sort of think about as you go back to your campuses and talk about this, hopefully. One of those is, what are we going to do with our faculty? In the past, those have been the folks that have been engaged in the relationship. What is that going to look like moving forward? Because it's clear it's going to look different. And connected to that is two questions that I'm not sure we always do ask. How can that help us, but how can that maybe hurt us? There's going to be some trade-offs, and we need to clearly think more about those and what they mean at different institutions. We also, I think, came out with the tension of there are some wonderful things that technology can do, and how do we find ways to leverage it so that it does have meaning and it doesn't throw the baby out with the bathwater. And I've been really struck this afternoon at several times hearing people talk about, it's one thing to think about data for accountability purposes, but we also have to think about data for action. I was struck by Dr. Ming saying we can't just scare people with it. We have to figure out a way that we can use it. And I think that's something that you heard in the group report outs, and it's certainly something that you heard in this closing panel. And then finally, the other tension that really sort of jumped out to me is one of, it's clear that we can't do this alone, that we need partners, and those partners have to have resources. And traditionally, that's meant vendors. But there's some trade-offs there too. There are ways that they can help us, and there are ways that that can create more tensions within an organization. And where do we find that balance? How do we find the partners to work with, and how do we shape and change maybe what those partnerships look like, whether they be with vendors or philanthropic organizations or other institutions, as we begin to look at a shifting landscape for us. I want to leave you with one final thought. I want to thank you for being here and being a part of this conversation. One of the slides Judith showed at the very beginning was that barn raising. And I want to thank you for helping us collectively at least raise half of the barn maybe today. I'm a historian, so I'm never optimistic. But I think that we've at least raised part of the barn. And that's no small endeavor. And I hope as you go back to your institutions that you can continue these conversations to figure out how it is that we face and frame this future that we're all involved in, because we all want to make it better. So thank you.